chill seemed to settle over the old brick row house on Fenton Street the moment workers stepped inside. It was January of 1973, the coldest winter Boston had seen in years, and the long-abandoned house looked ready to crack under the weight of time itself. Locals whispered that something foul had happened there, something the city tried to forget. Yet the silence inside felt heavier than any rumor, like someone was holding a breath behind the walls, waiting. Before the story unfolds, listeners are invited to subscribe to Eclipsed Chronicles, where real horror and forgotten crimes are uncovered with a steady voice and a cold light. The trouble on Fenton Street began when a renovation crew arrived to prepare the property for sale. The house had been untouched since 1968 after the sudden disappearance of a woman named Eliza Harrow, a quiet tenant who lived alone on the top floor. Police listed her as missing, but neighbors insisted they heard things before she vanished. Soft taps behind the plaster, footsteps in empty rooms, and a voice as thin as mist whispering at night. In early 1973, the crew's foreman, Daniel Mercer, complained that tools kept going missing. Hammers rolled across the floor on their own. Cold drafts flowed from walls with no vents. At first, the men joked that rats were to blame. But jokes ended when one worker, Tom Avery, swore he heard someone calling his name from inside the wall beside the staircase. Not from the hallway, not from downstairs, inside the wall. Later that week, Daniel ordered the crew to stop working near that staircase. He claimed the structure might be unstable, but fear flickered behind his eyes. He wasn't protecting the men from a weak support beam. He was protecting them from something he could not explain, a presence pressing closer each day. The real horror began the morning the crew tore open the first rotting panel. The first wooden panel came off with a groan, spraying dust into the cold air. Behind it, instead of empty space, the crew uncovered a narrow crawl shaft, no wider than a person's shoulders. The air inside was sour, like something had been rotting for years without sunlight or movement. Tom Avery leaned in with a flashlight. The beam shook in his hand as he whispered for Daniel to come closer. Inside the cramped shaft, claw marks lined the wood, deep, splintered grooves carved with frantic strength. They ran from the far end of the space toward the opening as if someone had tried to escape, and failed. Before Daniel could speak, a sharp thump came from deeper in the wall. It wasn't settling wood, it wasn't a rat. It was rhythmic, deliberate. 3 knocks spaced evenly apart. Every man in the room froze. The knocks came again. Daniel ordered everyone out of the house. But fear does strange things to reason, and after a few minutes outside, Tom insisted on checking the far end of the shaft. He argued that if an animal was trapped in there, they needed to know. Reluctantly, Daniel agreed. 2 workers held the ladder while Tom crawled inside, his boots scraping against the wooden floorboards. The flashlight's glow shrank as he disappeared into the shaft. After a few feet, his voice echoed back, tight with confusion. He said there was something stuck in the corner, something wrapped in cloth. Daniel told him to come out immediately. Tom didn't respond. The men heard the flashlight hit the floor. Then came the sound of scraping. Soft, slow, like someone dragging their fingers across the wood. Only Tom's boots were now pointed toward the opening, motionless. Daniel shouted for him, but the shaft fell silent. Not even the winter wind dared move. What the crew found when they pulled Tom from the wall would haunt every investigation that followed. Tom Avery slid out of the shaft as if pushed by invisible hands. His eyes were wide, but they did not seem to see. Dust clung to his lips, and he shook uncontrollably. When Daniel knelt beside him, Tom spoke only one sentence, again and again, in a voice that sounded borrowed. She's still in there. Police sealed off the house within the hour. Officers entered the crawl space with masks and lights, following the path Tom had taken. At the far end, just as he said, something lay slumped in the corner, a shape wrapped in brittle yellowed sheets. The cloth cracked as they lifted it. The remains belonged to Eliza Harrow, missing for 5 years. Her hands were bloodied down to the bone, fingers broken from clawing at the walls. Marks on the wood matched her reach. The official report stated she had been trapped in the shaft during a break-in or repair accident. But neighbors and workers remembered what the officers chose not to mention: the position of her body. Eliza wasn't curled inward like someone desperate to escape. She was turned toward the open end, as if watching, as if waiting for someone to find her. After her body was removed, investigators attempted to cover the shaft. But each night, officers stationed outside swore they heard knocking from inside the house. 3 slow taps, spaced evenly apart. On the 4th night, a patrolman resigned after hearing a whisper drift from an empty second-floor window. It spoke his name in a thin voice, the same phrase Tom had repeated. By spring, the city halted all attempts to renovate the property. The house on Fenton Street was left to rot, boarded up and forgotten. But locals still walk on the opposite side of the road. And every winter, when the cold settles deep and the wind fades, some claim they hear it again. 3 knocks, a scrape along the wall, and a woman's voice, dry, patient, calling for someone who will listen. For more true horror stories and real mysteries, subscribe to Eclipsed Chronicles.